Behind the stately walls of southern plantations, power was not just wielded, it was weaponized. Some of the darkest secrets of slavery were hidden in plain sight, in the private chambers of white mistresses. They were celebrated in public as paragons of civility, as symbols of refinement and grace, yet in private their authority could become a tool of manipulation, coercion, and abuse. Enslaved men, already trapped by the rigid hierarchy of race and ownership, were vulnerable to these unseen pressures. Their bodies, their labour, and their dignity were at the mercy of those who claimed both virtue and dominion. How could acts of abuse go unnoticed, whispered only in fear and silence? The American South of the 17th through 19th centuries was a world built on hierarchy and spectacle. Plantations glittered with wealth, yet beneath the veneer of opulence lay lives bound by chains of fear, obedience, and cruelty. The social ladder was strict. Plantation owners at the apex, white mistresses wielding authority in domestic spheres, enslaved men struggling for survival, and enslaved women and children forced into endless labour. Grand halls and manicured gardens masked the oppression within kitchens, stables, and servant quarters, spaces where control and terror intertwined seamlessly. What happens when authority meets unchecked desire and the life has no value? White mistresses exercise power over domestic spaces, supervising enslaved men in ways both public and private. They assigned chores, enforced rules, and observed every action with a gaze that could punish or reward at will. Enslaved men faced constant threats, punishment for the smallest perceived disobedience, the looming spectre of family separation, and erasure from legal and social recognition. There was no possibility of consent, no space for negotiation. Each interaction carried the weight of survival. Compliance was never choice, but necessity. The system of slavery transformed every relationship into an equation of fear and control. Private spaces on plantations, attics, servant quarters, hidden chambers became instruments of manipulation. Diaries, letters, and oral histories reveal a chilling pattern. White mistresses asserting dominance over enslaved men, coercing them into acts that tested obedience and power beyond the individual. Agency was stripped, dignity shattered, and the effects rippled across generations. Even when the body endured, the spirit bore wounds that history tried to erase. Communities were reshaped by these abuses, leaving legacies of silence, fear, and resilience that stretched into the future. Historians began to uncover the hidden abuses through meticulous research, piecing together evidence from slave narratives, WPA interviews, diaries, and estate records. Each fragment told a story often obscured by fear, shame, or coded language. References to men kept close to the house or favouring certain servants hinted at coercion and manipulation, revealing a systemic pattern of abuse rather than isolated incidents. These were not private indiscretions, they were exercises of power, weaponized within a system designed to strip agency from every enslaved person. The walls kept secrets, but the stories persisted in whispers, in testimony, and in the courage of those who dared to remember. Confronting these revelations shattered the long-standing myth of the innocent Southern lady. White women, once seen as fragile and virtuous, were revealed to be agents of control whose authority could inflict profound psychological and physical harm. Families, historians, and communities grappled with the complexity of this history, struggling with denial, shame, and heartbreak. Yet acknowledgement was essential. Recognizing these abuses restored humanity to the men whose lives had been manipulated, violated, and silenced. Can society fully confront a history that sought to erase these men? The cultural reckoning extended beyond scholarship. Museums, documentaries, and literature began to incorporate these difficult truths, giving voice to the enslaved men whose experiences have been hidden for centuries. Academic discourse shifted to frame these acts as systemic abuses of power, rather than anomalous or mutual relations. Public memory, long sanitized, was forced to confront the moral ambiguity and cruelty embedded within daily life on the plantation. These revelations demanded reflection, understanding, and a re-examination of the foundations of historical narratives. Power inversion played a crucial role. White mistresses, restricted by patriarchal structures, found in their control over enslaved men a dangerous yet irresistible assertion of authority. The racialized imagination of the time, which framed black men as both fear, were passed down, forming a hidden inheritance that shaped generations. The moral lessons are stark. Unchecked authority corrodes empathy. Silence perpetuates injustice. And the effects of systemic abuse echo across time. By acknowledging these histories, society can begin to confront the structural inequalities and human suffering that continue to resonate today. History tried to conceal the power and abuse behind plantation walls, but these stories demand remembrance. Understanding the past ensures that exploitation and silence are never repeated. The hidden abuse of power shaped lives, defined generations, and left a legacy we must confront. Only by facing these uncomfortable truths can the descendants of pain and oppression begin to reclaim dignity. And only through remembrance can the lessons of history prevent such violations from ever occurring. Even as centuries passed and the plantations fell into ruin, the echoes of these hidden abuses persisted. The walls that once confined fear now only hint at the magnitude of the suffering they witnessed. Attics, servant quarters, and private chambers, once instruments of domination, remain silent monuments to a history deliberately ignored. Diaries and letters preserved fragments of memory, whispering the names and acts the world refused to acknowledge. Each recovered narrative is a voice that survived, demanding that we confront the human cost of unchecked power. Psychological scars endured far beyond the confines of slavery. Enslaved men carried shame, fear, and confusion that could never be named, and communities bore the weight of trauma that echoed through generations. Masculinity was redefined by survival, trust eroded by systemic betrayal, and identity fractured under the constant threat of exploitation. To endure was to exist in a world where every choice was coerced, every act of obedience a forced compromise of self. Even freedom could not undo the lessons learned in silence and terror. Modern scholarship forces society to confront uncomfortable truths. White mistresses were neither mere victims of patriarchy, nor uniformly benevolent figures. They were human agents of a system designed to dehumanize, exploiting authority in ways that left deep and lasting harm. These revelations challenge every steps toward healing. The process is painful, but necessary, because only through recognition can the moral debts of the past begin to be addressed. Embarrassment, when left unchecked, transforms into something monstrous. White mistresses, constrained in public life yet empowered within private spaces, could exploit the total absence of legal or social accountability. Their authority was absolute, their cruelty often invisible, and the victims, enslaved men, were left to navigate impossible choices. The system permitted this because it required silence, obedience, and fear. To confront this history is to recognize that oppression is not one-dimensional. It moves through families, institutions, and social expectations, perpetuating damage long after the original acts have ended. These stories are not just historical accounts, they are moral imperatives. They ask us to face the ways human systems can warp morality, to witness the suffering caused by unchecked authority, and to acknowledge the resilience of those who survived. Remembering these abuses is not an exercise in blame, but in understanding. It restores dignity to the men whose lives were stolen and teaches the living how power, when misused, leaves indelible marks on the human spirit. In the stillness of empty corridors, in the remnants of servant quarters, in fading photographs and crumbling estates, The past whispers its truths. Power corrupted, innocence stolen, and the legacy endured. History does not forgive ignorance, and silence only perpetuates harm. To listen, to speak, and to remember is the only way to honor those who suffered, unseen, unheard, and unacknowledged for generations. The hidden abuse of power shaped lives, defined generations, and left the legacy we must confront. Only by facing these truths can the echoes of pain finally find recognition, and only through remembrance can history begin to heal the wounds it once inflicted.